Okay.
Yes, we are. Everybody's got an ice cream and a wrapper to wrap it up in. Okay, so this talk is Android is not Vi, mobile user experiences for geeks, and we have the dynamic duo, Paris and Chris.
Okay, we find we're actually quite static.
Mostly, yes. Hi everyone, welcome to the talk. I'm Paris, this is Chris. That's not us.
No, this is us. Is the mic working? Can you hear us up the back? We're feeding back a bit on this one.
It's a bit quiet, muffled.
Everything is muffled.
Everything good?
Oh.
Still feeding back. Okay, yes, this talk is an obvious statement, hopefully.
Oh, hopefully.
Come forward.
So,
Better?
Paris?
Chris?
Yep.
Much better.
Cool. Hi, I'm Chris. This is Paris. I'm a mobile hacker for Secret Lab. I've been working with Android for the best part of a year and a half now. And
co-founder of Secret Lab. We sort of act like we're arguing or making things up on the spot when we talk.
do we really?
Yes.
Okay, fair
So
enough.
don't be surprised if this looks mostly incoherent sometimes. That's what we do.
Hopefully we get a point across, though.
Hopefully we do.
Yeah, so this talk is called Android is not Vi. Hopefully that's an obvious statement. This talk is going to be full of obvious statements that you should hopefully find obvious, and you won't learn anything at all from the talk.
Absolutely.
So if you're fazed by that, I suggest you leave now. I hear there's a lot of other good talks on at the moment.
Exactly. Okay, so the basis for this talk is a problem, and it's a fairly large problem in the Android app community. That problem is that most apps have too much stuff in them, and that stuff is often not very good. So we're here to help you solve that problem.
There is actually two problems in the world of Android.
We can't hear you.
Can't you? Which one of us?
Which one, me?
Chris.
Can't hear Paris or?
Chris.
Right, hi. Okay, the other problem, yes it is. This is going to look fantastic on the recordings.
Yeah.
Shall we just have a back and forth with the audience about how the AV is meant to be working for the entire
I would be
35
happy to
minutes?
do
It's
that.
going to be better than the talk, I can assure you.
Don't forget to mention the air conditioning.
Oh yeah, if you feel like fainting, please don't. If you do feel like fainting, please raise your hand and tell us so that we can
ignore you.
the organisers. We don't like it when people faint.
Cooler down the front.
Please don't all come closer to us.
Yeah, we don't. Right, so the other problem in the Android development
Is
the
iPhone
Android
users.
app space is iPhone users, because they say this.
All
I'm
the
sure
time.
you've heard this from an iPhone user sometime. I've heard it from Paris, he's an iPhone user.
Sorry. They're all smug. They're all really smug.
Yes.
And that's a problem. And there's another problem still.
Oh, so I lied when I said there were three?
Of course, yes.
Oh, oops.
The other problem still is Google, because Google often has really funny ideas about what constitutes design or UX, as evidenced by the fairly famous quote here, which is where they tested...
They are A/B tested, yeah.
A/B testing a colour is not design, for the record. You should not do this, ever. That said, there is some good news.
Yes, there's good news in the Android world, and that's that they've actually hired some UX people in the last year or so, including Matthias Duarte, who used to work on WebOS at HP, and
He has design sense.
He has a vision for what Android should be about, which is using components of apps to make content available and making sure that everything is really diverse, and that's why people have Android devices.
Exactly.
So before we get on to the talk proper, we kind of want to know who you are. Perhaps you're a designer. Is anyone here actually a designer? Oh, that's more than I expected at LCA.
The four of you can leave.
Perhaps you're a coder or a hacker or an engineer or some sort of combo of all five of these. I can count. We also have an agenda.
Do we? It's amazing.
Yes, we're telling people about Android.
Okay, so our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what Android is and waffle on about how and why it works. Then we're going to attempt to define UX if you've not studied or looked at UX before. And then we're going to talk about some other things. So let's get started with an important warning.
That's that most of the information that we're going to tell you is not useful now and won't be useful for another year because it's talking about Android 4.0.
Basically completely useless.
Yes, it's just come out in the past couple of months, but this chart tells you that nobody actually uses Android 4.0 at the moment. And in fact, everybody still uses Android 2.3 and Android 2.2, and that's the vast majority.
How many people are running Ice Cream Sandwich? It's like only Nexus S and Galaxy Nexus users? Is anyone who's not using one of those devices running it?
What have you got?
Put a Galaxy S with ICS on it.
Oh, special.
Do you like pain?
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. Because most of you don't know, we're going to tell you what Android is. Because you probably think it's this.
Or that guy.
Android? No? Yeah, so most of you probably think that Android is just this thing that you run on phones. Well, it's not, because, you have things like this, Android running tablets.
Well, that means it runs on mobile devices.
That means it must be something that runs on mobile devices. Well, actually, that's also not true. It's an OS that runs on devices. Lots of devices.
Including
toasters.
That is an actual Android toaster. You can buy that.
There are also dishwashers and microwaves that run Android.
If you want the Android toaster, it's a company called Touch Revolution. It runs Android. Basically, the point is that Android runs on many, many different form factors. So basically, if it's running on a toaster, that toaster could have a mouse, a 40-key keyboard, and 2 displays. Or it could have none of those things. So you need to bear in mind the myriad potential options for Android input and output.
So yeah, we've got this. Yes, it does. It's an internet-enabled toaster. You might remember those from the 90s. So yeah, in the world of certain other mobile devices, there's a good distinction between tablets and phones. You can sort of tell if you're running on a tablet device or a fruity-type phone device. You know the one I'm talking about. But in Android, there's very, very, very little distinction between the two sorts of devices.
There's basically a continuous spectrum of devices ranging from 2 inches to 50 inches.
And the Galaxy Nexus is almost as big as the smallest Android tablet that's on the market. So the lines are really, really blurred in Android.
But that one's just weird.
The good news is that Android abstracts away the various screen sizes and gives you 4 categories, which are defined as thus. Oh, good, they didn't laugh at this conference.
They didn't laugh this time.
The people at OSDC are completely dirty when they see this slide. I have no idea why. But yeah, they abstract away 4 different screen sizes, so you only have to target 4, and they abstract away 4 different pixel density ranges, so you only have to count for 4, which means that there's there's 16 different types of screens that you can handle in Android, which is still quite a lot compared with the iOS space. You only have 2 sizes of iPhone and the iPad.
Yeah, it's magic.
And there's 16 in Android. But the good news is that most realistic devices tend to cluster around the diagonal of this table, so things aren't quite as bad as you might think.
Kind of helps you make assumptions.
You don't have to cater for all the screen sizes.
Just some of them. So when you're thinking about your screen sizes, it's often helpful to actually start at the highest resolution or highest screen size you want to support and work backwards and figure out how you're going to optimize and make your interface more efficient.
Design with smaller components which you can put together in a multi-pane layout, but then add navigation for smaller devices so that you have common elements, so if people go to tablets, they can see the same sort of interaction.
Exactly. The key thing to remember here is you can reuse components everywhere and create bigger interfaces from lots of small pieces. So basically, Android's been evolving for a very long time. It's come a long way since 1.0, where it was awful, to now, where it's actually pretty good and pretty modern. But you need to pay attention to the way it's evolved to sort of understand the context of what you're building.
And lots of things have come and gone during the life of Android. So some things that were there at the start really have fallen by the wayside or even been said, you must not do this because it is absolutely dreadful, even though we still have software support for it.
Exactly.
So, as a rule, you should design for the majority of devices that are out there. So make sure that your apps look really good on 2.2 and 2.3. But lots of people are getting 4.0 devices, and that's only going to increase in the future. So you need to make sure that you design with the future in mind, because it'll be here sooner than you think.
The future's actually already here. So this continuous and rapid evolution of Android basically affects everything you do, because it means everything's changing constantly, which means it's basically impossible to keep up with. So you need to keep up with it. So
ways of presenting how you interact with Android, they can change as different apps come up with different ideas for how you present things. So you may remember in old versions of Android, there's a menu button which brings up a menu to bring up things that you could do with an app. Whereas these days, that's gone by the wayside in favor of an action bar.
Which is something that started as a random piece of an app that Google once made, and people decided they liked it, so then it became an official part of the SDK. We'll come back to the action bar later on.
And the best part of this is that all the documentation is completely wrong and inconsistent.
Google refers to things that don't exist anymore They refer to things that are deprecated, and they refer to things that flat out never existed.
Or they lie about when things were first released. So things like the action bar have been backported into old versions of Android in a compatibility library, but they don't say it in the documentation that it's available, which is fantastic. So go look at the Google developer blog for Android. That contains heaps of up-to-date information and stuff that should be in the documentation that's quite old but hasn't made it there. So thanks, Google.
Thanks for that, yeah, that's great. So basically we're going to have a little chat about some principles of Android design. These are some slightly quirky principles that Google puts forth and tells us how we should design our apps. So we can quick look at those. First one is clear versus simple. This basically means they recommend that you make your functionality really clear in favor of it being simple, because people often assume that being simple is the only way to go when you're designing a mobile app, and they start removing features.
So it's about making things obvious as opposed to removing the feature set, because
Exactly.
people still want to do things on their phone.
Yes, and like the iPhone has ingrained in people that people don't want any functionality at all for whatever reason, even though that's not true there either. So people think, oh, I need to delete all the features to make this app, when really it's about presenting them in a clear and efficient manner. And we'll come back to that again later. Next one is make things consistent yet engaging. Again, with a platform like Android and any other platform that has a wide range of widgets, people often assume they have to use the widgets and they can't change them. That's false. You should be using all the widgets they supply to you and tweaking them to give a bit of personality that reflects your app or your product.
But you know, you shouldn't reuse your assets from an iPhone app, because
Never.
that'll just make your app look like it's for the iPhone and people hate you for it.
And we'll touch on that again later. Along the same lines, you should vary things elegantly. Don't be afraid to tweak things and make them have a bit more personality.
Something that might confuse you is this idea of content versus Chrome. When we talk about Chrome, we're talking about UI elements in an app. So the emphasis in an app should be on what it's displaying and not how you're interacting with it. A good example of this in Android is the web browser. So you have the URL bar that appears at the top of a screen with the web page content below it. But if you scroll, the URL bar disappears off the top of your screen. That's not something that you'd see on a desktop web browser, for example.
Exactly. The final one is you should be enhanced by the cloud and maintain context. Google likes you to save things back to the cloud. That's obvious. The maintain context one is slightly more interesting in that you should always be a good citizen. And if, for example, a phone call comes in while the user is using your app, they should be able to go back to your app in exactly the same state they left it without any confusion. Pretty straightforward.
We've got this slide up here for you to laugh at. Google have put this on their website. We don't know what it means.
Does anyone know what this means?
This is apparently what Android apps are meant to do now. Android can make you amazing.
I'm pretty sure this...
Sorry?
How come I didn't know this earlier?
We don't know. Don't
So
we feel better
that-
for knowing this?
You can be amazing now.
Exactly. We think
We're here to help.
we think this means make your apps actually do what they're meant to do. That's the best description we can come up with of this. So yeah, basically make your apps good. And that's the end of the
Well,
talk.
that's... Thanks.
Anyway,
Right, so now we're going to talk about user interface patterns on Android.
we don't really want to turn this into a big survey of random UI elements.
So let's show you some random UI elements.
Exactly.
There's a lot of them.
There are a huge amount of them. There's lists, tabs, scrolling lists, all sorts of amazing stuff. The Ice Cream Sandwich SDK, as we sort of touched on earlier, has put a lot of stuff into the framework that previously was available as random fragments everywhere. So now there's a whole bunch of official stuff that previously wasn't necessarily official.
Things like the page view in the Market app, which was only available to Google originally, has sort of become available to developers, and that makes small screen navigation much more easy to implement now.
Exactly.
Another thing that's really popular is the action bar.
The action bar is a really, really important piece of interface for Android. It was previously debuted as sort of a random element that was part of the Google I/O app for 2010. People decided they liked it, so Google sort of made their own version and made it available. And now it's an official part of Android 3.1, I think, or 3.0. And there's also a piece you can use way back to Android 1.6.
Yeah, the backported action bar, I think, got made available along with version 4.0. So yeah, there is a compatibility library that lets you implement action bars in Android 4 and back to 1.6, which is another thing that's in the that isn't properly in the documentation.
The action bar is really important because it makes a consistent way to access the core features of an app. So basically you've got the caret in the top left-hand corner, which lets you back out of the navigation. You've got the icon. You've got a drop-down that lets you access the main views, and you've got buttons that access what the user should be perceiving as the primary functionality of your app.
Yeah, so these bits at the end, the common actions that you'll see in an action bar, might previously have been seen in the options menu of an Android app.
It's a really cheap way to make users know how to use your app without having to think about it, because most apps should look like this at this point.
So yeah, things are no longer buried in the menu, they appear at the top of the screen, or possibly overflowing into the bottom, which you can do by setting settings in your manifests. Nothing more to say, Paris?
No.
Really?
Really.
Okay, we should go to the next slide then, shouldn't
Well,
we?
you've got the clicker.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
So themes are a pretty...
Should the elements we have on the right of the action bar change depending where you are?
Yes.
Yeah, they should be in context based on what you're showing on the screen.
The buttons should show what you think are the most primary actions for that screen.
It's just like how the menu would behave on old Android apps. You'd have a different options menu for different activities or different views.
Yep. So there's a whole bunch of themes in Android which lets you make an interface that looks passably good without having any graphic design knowledge. Prior to Ice Cream Sandwich, these were all kind of ugly.
They're not anymore.
With Ice Cream Sandwich, they're not ugly. There's two themes, Hollow Light and Hollow Dark.
And then there's a mix of both.
Then you can combine them. Basically, this means you can make an app that looks really good without having to design a thing in terms of graphic design. So that's really positive.
That's good, because I don't know anything about design.
Neither do I.
Oh, you can write apps now. I don't.
It's amazing.
Cool, I don't need to do any more work.
Thanks, Chris.
Anyway, another philosophy in Android is to write simple parts of applications that can be shared between other apps. So, for example, in Twitter, if you want to share an image, you can load up the camera app instead of Twitter replicating the camera functionality. And you should consider doing that in your own, or similar things to that in your own app. If there's functionality you can export, you should do that.
This modularity is really, really important because apps are not necessarily going to be launched from the icon on a home screen or from the icon in the app launcher. People can launch your apps from a dashboard widget. They can launch your apps from a notification. They can launch your apps from other apps, like Chris just said. And if you're not thinking about the different entry points for your app's going to feel really weird because it's going to launch fresh every time users try and use it.
Yeah, this is something that varies from other systems that you may be used to coding for. The next slide has a diagram which Paris is going to explain.
So this diagram is really weird. It's from Google. I liked it because it looks weird, but it has a point. There's three types of apps on Android. There's the single activity app where it's like a calculator or a camera where it really does one thing and there's not really any hierarchy to it. There's the sort of flat hierarchy where it's sliding between sort of 3 or 4 different things. That's something like the phone app where you've got the dial pad, the address book and so on. And then there's apps that look like this, like Gmail, where you're sort of diving between different hierarchies of data. And this is a helpful way of laying out your app as you think about it before you've even started coding. And we'll mention that you should be drawing things on paper later on, but this is the way you should be thinking about it on paper. Doing this really helps to minimize the conceptual models.
What's a conceptual model, Paris?
A conceptual model is the model a user builds of a system as they're using it. So it's the way they map things to work in their mind.
So it's an idea of how things should actually work.
Exactly. And if you break that, they get very confused.
So people have preconceptions of how things should work even though they've never seen the thing before.
Exactly.
That's really unfair.
I know. It's like it's totally unfair. That's why the iPhone's popular. Yes.
What, every app on the iPhone's the same?
No, many of them though.
Oh, okay.
So Google doesn't actually do this well enough.
Apparently you only need one app for your iPhone.
Yes.
You heard it here first.
It's called Phone. Google does not do this well enough. Google breaks conceptual models constantly. One example of this would be?
Application management in older versions of Android. So if you want to launch an app, you have the app launcher, but if you want to delete it, you have to go into system settings. So who here would think that you'd actually have to go into system settings to do stuff related to application management? Yeah, not
the geeks would, but
the geeks
again,
would, but it's not immediately obvious.
People,
and then if you put an application shortcut onto your home screen, you can delete the shortcuts from the home screen, but deleting the shortcuts does not delete the app.
But if you have a widget on the home screen and you delete the widget, it deletes the state of the widget, and the widget's gone forever. So yeah, these are very odd conceptual models for people who are not used to the way computers work, and a good app abstracts this sort of thing away.
And they've fixed that quite a bit in ICS and later versions of Honeycomb, thankfully.
Anyway.
So yes, a summary of this section is that you should know your devices. They have different dimensions, they have different inputs, screens, sensors, whatever.
Toast.
Yes, browning settings, very important.
And know the platform.
Yeah, I think we're talking about Android today.
Really? Okay. Well, we should show a picture of an Android then.
Okay, let's do that. There's an Android.
Good. Okay, we're going to quickly touch on UX now, which is kind of the premise of this talk. And I've got a quote.
From someone you all love.
From somebody you all love and adore about design. So design is actually how it works, believe it or not. Many people assume the wrong thing and they assume this. They assume
People think that design is how your app looks, what colors you use, where you put pictures, where you put buttons and all that. Design is not just pixels. They help.
design is not about pixels. Design is not
Paris wrote this slide.
Yeah, design is not about making people go, wow, please don't remember the Windows Vista campaign. Anyone? No? Good.
Good.
It's not about the wow. It's about leading the user somewhere.
Yes, leading them to where they want to be or where you're being told to go,
Yeah, exactly.
in this case.
It's probably a bad picture for that slide.
Yeah.
Shame we've kept it. So design is about building products that actually make sense.
Making things that do what people expect them to do. For example, a hand dryer that actually dries your hands.
Making something that blows and making it better.
Oh, that's funny.
No, it's not. It's a joke about the Dyson blower.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So people want to do things on their phones. So you should allow the users to do what they want by making things available to them.
That's fairly straightforward.
Yes, it is. And you should tell them that something has happened when they do something. So, when they press a button, it should look like a button has been pressed.
Yes.
When they drop their phone, their screen should smash.
Thinking about these things is not optional at all.
Yes, we put this in the abstract, which I'm sure that you read.
Hopefully, yeah. Basically, you need to anticipate user needs and think about what users actually might want to accomplish in your app and present it before they expect it without throwing it all in at once.
Users should think that your app is simple when they use it. So design to make it seem like it's simple, even if it needs to be complex.
Like an onion.
Ooh, layers.
Layers.
Oh, that's clear.
It's good.
Yes. So a user might need, you might give them something that's really, really complicated when really that's all they care about.
This is an app for flying a plane.
So now we're going to tell you about the people who use your applications.
They're all idiots.
Ooh, hang on. You want to interrupt?
Which planes does it work on?
All of them.
Everything.
Can't you tell?
Yeah, it works on every plane I've seen.
Ever. 100% compatible.
You shake it for turbulence.
Yeah.
So we're now going to tell you about the people who use your applications.
Yeah, as I said, they're all idiots. Basically, they're fickle, which means they can switch apps at a moment's notice and download somebody else's app and do something completely different. They're bored, which means they probably want to do something else or probably don't know what they want to do. They're distracted.
Pardon?
Thanks, Chris. Which means they're distracted. They're quite likely confused, as well as possibly busy.
Like us, we're presenting.
Exactly, and possibly also being hit by a bus.
We can't demonstrate this one, sorry.
Unfortunately. So basically, when you think about your mobile users, you should think of them basically like this slide. They probably don't know where they are or know what they're doing. They're likely in bright sunlight, walking around, getting on a bus, trying to drive at the same time. There's probably sun in their eyes, sun on their screen. So basically, they see the beautiful app you've built as a really wobbly thing that they can barely figure out how to use.
And we have this lovely summary slide.
Which basically means you need to meet their expectations, because if you're not meeting their expectations when they're in this confused state, and being a science dog, then they won't be able to use your app. Or Robin Williams from Jumanji, then they won't be able to use your app.
So on the subject of meeting the user's expectations, this guy here wrote an interesting set of design vocabulary. His name is Norman.
Donald Norman, not Norman Bates.
So he's not a psycho.
We don't know.
Okay. We'll assume he's sensible and what he has to say is actually very valuable to this talk.
Okay,
That's why he's on here.
Exactly. He has a design vocabulary. And we haven't got time to go through all these. This is basically human-computer interaction 101. But the two we're going to look at are visibility and affordance. If you want to learn about the others, come and ask us at some point.
Or read the book.
Or read the book, which we'll point out later. Not our book, his book.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to talk about is affordance. And the best way to talk about affordance is to show you things that don't have it. Who here knows what a tap is? Fantastic. People wash at this conference. It's amazing. The rest of you need to learn about it.
I'm not so sure. Can you smell what I can smell?
Well, that's all the people who didn't raise their hands.
The one who came close to us.
Okay, so who here's been to a hotel? Great. Who has had difficulty operating a shower in a hotel? Right. So let's take a poll. Who here knows how to operate this tap here?
There's no knobs on the wall.
Who didn't go to our OSDC talk and knows how to operate this tap?
I don't think so. I think he actually knows.
How do you operate it?
You grab the bottom part and pull it downwards.
No.
You push it.
No.
No? I've seen one like you're talking about, but that's not how you use this one.
You grab this. You grab this and you rotate.
Such that it leaks all over you.
Right. So now that you know about things that don't have affordance, let's tell you what it is. It's the perception that you can do something to a device to make it work.
If anyone knows how to open that door in the other picture, let me know.
Yeah, Paris can't get into his bedroom anymore. Yeah, so affordance is the perception that you can interact with something.
And people really freak out if they can't interact with it the way they expect to.
People have expectations of certain devices, so you all know how to operate a tap. So if you see a tap that you're not familiar with, you're going to use ideas that you have preconceived in your head to adapt to these new taps that you've never seen before, which means that you're going to take ages and get really, really frustrated when you can't figure out how to work it.
So we have a quiz for you. How do we get into this petrol tank? Where?
Where do you press it?
On the right-hand side.
Well, the answer is we have no idea because we didn't take this photo.
There is a hinge behind there somewhere, and it's one of those ones where you have to push in the right spot, otherwise it doesn't open.
So an example from mobile design, or Android in this case, is presenting them with a share widget that doesn't look like an Android share widget.
This is an Android app with an iPhone share widget. So when you tap something on an iPhone and it needs to
There's
present
a share
multiple
button at
options,
the top.
a thing slides up from the bottom. That's not what you do on Android.
Whereas Android users are generally used to seeing something that looks like this. And if you present them with this, they're more likely to know how to proceed from there.
Because they'll already have used something like it. The sad thing is the iPhone clone was probably more effort to implement than the right way. So
It's like 2 or 3 lines of code in Android to bring up that widget, whereas to do the entire custom thing would have taken some developer a couple of days, probably.
So yeah, the only other thing we're going to mention from Don Norman's design vocabulary is being visible. Being visible basically means you need to relate the design of an object to its operation, using cues on how you use something. So a button should look like a button. When you press it, it should depress. Things like that.
Show users the things that they need to see.
If you want to learn more about taps, there'll be a book we'll recommend at the end.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Vi.
It's a picture of Bill Joy. So does anyone know what Vi has to do with all this? Or not?
What?
It's got a better interface than most iPhone and Android apps.
Yes!
Good. Somebody's learnt something from this talk. Oh.
How you think translates to the keystrokes you use?
Yeah, that's good. So,
Okay. Well,
in addition to all those things, which are all correct, it's also a really efficient and immediate interface. Despite a reputation for being complex, it actually really only presents the things that you need at the time you need them.
once you know how to operate Vi, you know how to use it, and it's not confusing.
And that's mostly because it's only giving you what you need at the time to do something.
It tells you what mode you're in, for example, when you're in a given mode, which is useful feedback to a user.
It's task-driven, basically.
Just like mobile.
Just like mobile.
We made an analogy. We can be smug now.
Exactly.
So the design of mobile apps is about presenting abilities, not features. So users, when they operate a mobile application, they want to do things. They don't want to use your application. They want to get somewhere quickly while they're driving, or they want to call someone, or they want to listen to music. They don't want to open Winamp. They want to listen to that awesome song they heard the other day.
I'm going to kick myself for asking this to this audience, but does anyone in this room think I'm going to launch the phone app when they want to make a phone call on their Android phone? Or do you think I want to make a phone call? How many people think I want to make a phone call? Okay, good. That was more of you. Good. Yeah. So you think in that context when you're using a mobile, which is important. To do this, it's really important that you constrain operations, and this is something Vi does really well, and most Android apps don't do really well. Only show things that make sense at the time. If you show everything, people just get confused, and they don't know what to do, or they just leave your app because they're fickle. Don't show everything at once and then have to explain it. This is how to use a magazine. You may have heard of a magazine. They're quite complex to use. This is not an app.
No, remember, magazine is easy to use, as this diagram demonstrates.
I don't believe it because it needs all the instructions. This is not an app magazine. This is an actual magazine.
Depends what you're using it for. Like, if you want to use it to squash mosquitoes.
Inconsistent documentation, Marco. So yeah, common operations in Android applications should be easy to accomplish. And basically, to do that, you should always make sure that what you do meets the user's expectations. Don't surprise the user with something that they don't expect. For example, Android has a whole bunch of well-defined touch gestures, and they do well-defined things, and they're not the same as the well-defined touch gestures on iPhone.
iPhone is subtly different, and as is every other touch-based platform, and many apps override the defaults for these things when they shouldn't be, and people then don't know how to use your app.
Tap and hold is wrong. It means select.
So tap and hold means select as of ice cream sandwich.
Yes, but before then it was bring up a context menu.
And we'll touch on that as well.
So yeah, dialog boxes, they're generally awful.
Because they interrupt what you're doing.
They take up all your attention, and you can't do anything while they're there. They interrupt your train of thought.
There's really no good reason to use a dialog box unless your app has entered some unrecoverable state.
The same as being modal. You should not completely take up all the users' attention with something that you want to show them.
There's absolutely
That's
no
just
good reason.
confusing.
Yeah. Okay, so a good way to avoid doing all the bad things is to prototype your app.
Yes, Ben?
Unless you're asking for confirmation.
Unless you've got a really good reason to do it. All generalizations are false, including this one.
So a really good way to prototype is to actually use paper. Has anyone ever done paper prototyping yet before? That's really good. Paper prototyping is more useful than you'd think. It basically allows you to test things with paper, and paper is a lot cheaper and less time consuming to build an app with than actually coding it, especially when you're using Eclipse. So by drawing your app on paper, or even better, Android phone-sized pieces of cardboard, you can actually test your app and hopefully find all the usability flaws before you spend time making Chris build it.
So what do you need to do with these pieces of paper?
Just hand them to your friends.
Wouldn't you need to have a lot of friends to do this?
No.
Who here has 5 friends?
About 5 of you.
Yeah, that's what we got at OSDC too. Yeah, if you have 5 friends, then you can find about 75% of usability flaws in an application.
So when people think about sort of doing usability analysis, they often think we need a huge amount of people. This graph, which you can all trust because it's a graph or a chart, basically says you only need 5 to 10 to actually find most of the flaws in a program you're designing. So if you do it on paper before you actually build it.
Yes, Brianna?
How do you find usability problems with no evaluator?
Because you've got yourself.
Well, no, you're not an evaluator, you're an implementer.
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't implement, like, as a sensible person, you don't implement 25% of usability flaws.
If you want to learn more about this, Google Nielsen heuristic analysis.
Cool. So that means we're near the end of our talk.
Thankfully.
Yay.
Some parting words for you.
So first is to not port apps.
You're an idiot if you port an app.
Yeah, people who use Android applications expect Android applications to behave like Android applications and not like iOS applications.
Yes.
You've probably seen something like this. So yeah, here's an Android app and an iOS app for the same service. The one on the right is the Android application, and as you can see, they've basically directly ported the entire user interface of it. We've got the tab bar down the bottom, which on old versions of Android would be obscured by a menu bar, which is dreadful.
This basically means they're lazy and stupid. You shouldn't do this. The iPhone app was clearly designed first, and either they got lazy or didn't know any better and built an Android app that looks like the iPhone app.
Whereas it is actually possible to design apps for the same service on both Apple platforms and Android and still make them look like Apple apps and Android apps. This is one that I was working on last year.
It's apparently going to come out soon.
Finally.
Okay, so this only relates to older versions of Android right now.
Yeah, context menus are dreadful.
Context menus are dreadful because they, mysterious. They do that.
Yes, they distract you for 2 seconds while you're pressing and holding on something. See, segue.
Exactly. Pressing and holding is not a discoverable way to find options. And as of Android 4.0, pressing and holding is for selecting things, not for finding on context menus. But basically, on older versions of Android, a context menu comes up when you tap and hold. And there's no easy way to find out whether that's there or not. So you tap and hold on everything and nothing happens. And you get
Who here's used Google Maps? Great, so you see this every time you update Google Maps on your Android device, and it tells you what you can do on Google Maps that you couldn't do last time you ran it. You're expected to memorize this because when you dismiss it, you can't bring it back up.
It's thoroughly useful.
So it's telling you everything that's new, you're expected to know it, and yeah, it's complicated, and
you need
can't
to tell
remember
people
it.
how to use Magazine, you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
So mistakes. People often put those sort of big explanational displays up because they want to minimize the amount of mistakes people make in their app.
You know, people will do stupid stuff, especially if they're dared to do stupid stuff.
And as Norman Bates says, basically if a mistake is possible, somebody will do it. So you should basically allow for mistakes. And the easiest way to do that is to make your app really fault tolerant. And that's why dialog boxes for confirming things are perhaps not a good idea because you may as well just let them do it anyway and then let them reverse it. So if you make everything undoable, the risk is far less when they're doing things in your app. Users will feel more bulletproof and they'll be likely to explore a bit more.
No. Basically, make sure that you have your app in a state where everything can be reversed or can be repaired. And if something will go wrong, then tell the user about it and give them error messages and fail whenever you can, as opposed to leaving them hanging.
Make the phone explode.
You should also be fast.
Users get really angry when things are slow.
Yeah, and if you can't be fast, pretend to be fast. So, for example, in Twitter for Android, if you make a post, it pretends to put a tweet in your timeline while it actually goes off and sends it to you, or sends it off to Twitter.
So it displays the tweet before it's even confirmed that Twitter has accepted the tweet. And then it fails later on if it does fail.
And that way the user thinks that things are happening quickly even if they're not. On that note, assume that mobile networks are really, really bad, because most people are on Vodafone.
And I'm not joking, get a Vodafone phone so you can test.
If you don't want to go through the pain, the Android simulator has a mode where you can set it to GSM network type and GPRS data, and so it gives you latency and bandwidth restrictions to simulate a really bad network. Try your app in that mode. You'll be surprised how awful it is, and people are out there with networks that act like that.
Don't be tempted to assume like random loading and slowness is okay because it feels like a web page. People have different expectations of how a web page loads. They expect it to load in pieces. They don't have the same expectations in an app.
Other apps were written for bad networks, such as this one.
Like Vi, yeah, it's amazing. Vi does all sorts of tricks to draw parts of the screen at different times when you're not using them. So it makes it feel a lot faster than it actually is, because it was written for basically a 300 baud modem. And this is basically the same thing as writing a mobile app these days. Sure, the networks might be really fast, theoretically, but things are still going to lag. And if you have the same mindset...
So what you're saying is that Android is kind of sort of like Vi.
A lot like Vi, except it has one thing.
With touch. People who design for graphical user interfaces are probably used to having a mouse cursor, whereas on mobile devices, people have their quite large meat cursors. And it's a lot harder to hit a target precisely with a finger. So, make sure that your touch targets are large and have gaps between them.
Isn't meat cursors a fantastic term?
Yeah, so that's basically the end. Read this book, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman.
It teaches you how to make teapots that work really well. But seriously, if you have an interest in designing software that doesn't suck, read this book. It's fantastic.
And yeah, remember these rules that we put up throughout the presentation. These rules are really good for doing Android development, and they were written by this expert on Android back in 1999. His name's Eric Raymond, and he put it in this book, The Art of Unix Programming. So I've actually been telling you how to write command line apps subversively throughout this entire talk as well. So yeah, Android is not Vi, but it's a lot more alike than you think. Any questions?
Or heckling. That's it.
We accept both. Questions?
Thanks, fellas. I enjoyed your presentation very much, but I have a question for you. Have you considered porting this presentation for a night at the comedy club?
Well, we don't think we're that funny.
Yeah, I agree.
Well done, sir.
What are your thoughts on porting Vi to Android?
Go for
I think it's already been done. Yeah, it's already there. Just root your phone. It's a POSIX system. It has to have Vi. How would that work?
Well, you do that and show us next year.
Now that most handsets don't have a search button, do you think apps should almost always present a search button in the action bar or something?
Yeah, it's recommended, if you had search functionality, it should go into the action bar, because it's a common action if your app is commonly searched.
It should also be provided to the global search so it pops up in the results.
Yeah. Yep.
So I take it, based on your opinion about writing native apps, that you would not be a fan of things like PhoneGap, where you supposedly, just write it once and then it would run on both iPhone and...
So yeah, PhoneGap is good, but you need to be aware of its limitations. It does make apps that look good on all the major platforms, and they can do only a limited amount of things that native apps can. So it's not a solve everything solution anyway.
If you really want to use something like PhoneGap, it's a lot more effort to make a really good app, but it's not much effort to make an okay app.
Yeah, it can be done, and it can make apps that do behave well on all platforms. Up the back, I'm getting quite the workout today.
I'm glad I can just stand here.
So, with the don't port apps, I assume that's most really referring to the UX elements and the UI.
Yes.
It's perfectly fine to port a model and a control,
Yes.
as long as you re-implement the controller and the view, yeah?
Yes. You can even use the same UI code as long as you think about how it's working. No, the problem is when people don't think about how it works.
No, from an implementation point of view, as long as things make sense, if you're porting things to an Android UI, like your MVC layout actually makes sense in terms of the UI that you're going to present on Android, then there's no reason not to. I've seen people who have basically just done line-for-line ports of Objective-C code for iPhone to Android Java, and the APIs are similar enough that you can do it, and it does make sense. Just don't make the behaviour the same.
There's two really common problems when people port an Android app from iPhone. They either port the bare minimum and make a really simple Android compliant native but really crappy app because they don't want to invest in the time to deal with the fragmentation of the Android platform, or they make a cross-platform PhoneGap style app which doesn't feel right on either. Both of these are not acceptable, so don't do them.
If you don't put in effort, users won't give you good feedback. So if your app is crap, people will think it's crap.
And then people won't use it, so you want to invest more time in it, and it's a vicious cycle. So,
anyone else? I'm worried.
Just ignore him.
If we have a whip round and raise $5 or $10 and we buy you some shoes, would you wear them?
I'm not sure why you think the whip is necessary.
You don't have to stand next to him and present every time while he's not wearing shoes. He puts them in front of me.
That's what that smells like.
No, those are the barefoot people around here. At least I wear socks. This is going to look great for the people back in video land. No one else?
One more.
Oh. Yes, Marco.
All right, I'd like to preface this by saying, even though it sounds like it, this isn't a troll.
So it is.
I haven't met an Nokia N9 / although it's sitting on Maimo user who isn't really happy with the UI on their phone. Now, it is actually markedly different from Android, but it actually makes a lot more sense, particularly for those dumb users you were referring to earlier who don't know anything, except how to move their finger like this. But the point of the question is this. It's much easier to port code, and I've already seen it, from Maimo, Migo, other open source projects across to Android, rather than trying to pull it out of proprietary places. Wouldn't it make sense to do that and to sort of copy a few things that kind of would work really well? And who knows what Nokia's going to do with Maimo, Migo, but there's definitely some juicy stuff there worth preserving.
Paris, did you want to attack this? Okay. So when we say don't port apps, we don't mean that you shouldn't take any code that you've written for other platforms, because reusable code is good code regardless. But users on different platforms have different expectations of how things should behave. So taking code for Migo over to Android could make sense, but you do need to consider the UI and making the users who know that platform make that platform happy. Because if you take the effort to understand users of a platform, you'll get rewarded. People will buy your app, people will give you good feedback, and such. Is that it? All right, thanks.
Thanks, gents. And on behalf of the Linux conference, I'd like to present you with a little token award here, which is a glass penguin. You'll have to share it. Oh, you've already got one. That works out well. Excellent. Thanks again.